All right, today I'm going to be going through and rebuilding a carburetor on a 2003 Polaris Sportsman 500. Now this carburetor, we've already have it off the four-wheeler obviously, and I've showed you a video on how to remove this carburetor from the four-wheeler the best way, and then I'm going to go through now and I'm going to clean this carburetor in detail, show you what every specific part does, and just show you how the carburetor, how the fuel flows, how the air flows, and I'm just going to go through it as well as rebuild it and clean it all at the same time. So first things first, we've got your motor side here, we've got your intake, your airbox side that's here. When you take and air is being sucked through this carburetor here, the venturi here, it's also air is going to be flowing through here. As soon as air starts sucking through here, it's going to raise your slide up. It's going to lift your needle that you see down inside there. That's going to come up. That's going to allow more fuel to be sucked up through that middle main jet area there. And then as well as air is going to be flowing faster and faster. The other thing that's happening at the exact same time, as you're giving it throttle, it's going to open this butterfly here. And so if we flip the carburetor over on this side, you give it more throttle, that butterfly is going to open more and more. So full throttle, you're going to be completely open there, and air is going to be flowing through there as fast as possible. Again, at the same time, your slide is going to be up, your needle is going to be completely open, and fuel is going to be flowing through there as fast as it possibly can. What's going to change how fast that fuel flows through there is your main jet. I'm going to get into that here in the bottom of this carburetor here in a second, but up through this 17 millimeter cap here, and I've loosened it just to remove it quick to show you, but you can replace your main jet right here by pulling just this cap. Keep track of this washer that sits on here, or this O-ring, excuse me, is going to sit right down in there. Make sure that it's sealed properly, isn't leaking at all. But you can change that main jet out. That is either going to constrict that fuel, or it's going to allow more fuel to flow through there when you're at wide open throttle, or even half throttle. It will control how much fuel is going through there, but your needle's also doing that at the same time until you're wide open. Then it's completely up to your main jet there. So you want to make sure that these ports right here are cleaned out. This one actually has an area for your flat screwdriver to fit in there. Typically when you're changing riding conditions and altitude performance done to your four-wheeler, typically you don't change this smaller jet here. This is just has to do with airflow flowing through your carburetor. The fuel is going to come in from your fuel tank or from your fuel petcock here into this tab here. It's going to flow through here. It's going to drain right through there, and it's going to go down into your bottom bowl area. I'm going to now take these two screws off here so I can get down into that carburetor and show you a couple things down here. You can drain your fuel simply by removing this cap here, but that's not actually going to get it completely drained. The best way to drain your fuel is to loosen this Allen here. It's going to run out that bottom nipple there. We're going to take and pull these two screws off here. Once we get these removed, we're going to take and pull this off. Keep track of where those screws are. When your carburetor is sitting like this and you loosen up this drain plug here, that fuel is going to run to the lowest point on this bowl, which is there. It's going to run out that bottom tab there. You want to make sure you've got a vent line or a fuel hose on this, attached to this. Otherwise, all that fuel is going to drain directly onto your motor and your transmission. It's going to discolor that. It's going to ruin seals quicker. It's going to possibly start a fire if that motor's hot. So just make sure that you've got a line hooked up to here. And again, right here is your main jet. What I do is grab a larger screwdriver to pull this main jet. I'm going to take and pull this out, and it's a brass jet, so just be careful you don't damage it. If you have too small of a screwdriver, too many times what happens is you get a small screwdriver like this, people will try to pull that jet out. Well, what you're going to do there is just turn that screwdriver inside that middle area of that jet and damage that jet. So make sure you don't do that. We've got a small cap on there that's also brass fitting, and then you can see right down in there is your needle, the same needle that I showed you on this side here is going to go up and down in there. So that's why I said that fuel that's being sucked up through that main jet is controlled by your main jet, not necessarily your needle there. That needle there will tell or allow fuel to be sucked up and kind of tell it when to be sucked up through there. But if this main jet is in there properly, that main jet is what is restricting that fuel. I've got a plastic float here. Be really careful taking this apart here. It just pulls up out of here. It sits down. There's an O-ring here that sits down in that port there. And you've got your needle valve here as well as your needle here. It's got a rubber tip on there. We can pull that. I like to use a small pair of pliers to do that just so we're not damaging anything there. And inspect that rubber tip. Inspect that keeper there, that metal keeper there. Make sure that sits in the right position. And this needle is adjustable. So check my other video. I've done a separate video on how to adjust that and the settings on these, as you want to make sure that that is adjusted correctly. The other thing on this model, you can take and pull this out, and there is your seat there. And you can see there we've got a little piece of rubber that fell down into our carburetor there. So sucked up down through our fuel tank, in through our line, and was just sitting right here. Now, if that piece of rubber turned the other direction, got sucked up through there, it could potentially be holding our needle out, so we would constantly be dumping fuel into that carburetor even when that float is supposed to be shutting it off. And if your overflow then was plugged up, that fuel would go directly into the motor. Now, if that overflow is working properly, and this is your overflow line here, that fuel is just going to dump right out onto the floor of your shop or your trailer, whatever it is, and you'll notice that. So you want to make sure that that port is all cleaned out. Take compressed air, carbon choke cleaner, blow through there. Make sure this is all cleaned out from debris. If you have a carb kit, a lot of times these will come with it. Also replace that O-ring just to make sure you've got everything in tip-top shape. Now to remove your pilot jet here, it takes a small screwdriver. It's a small flat screwdriver. You want to make sure that you've got that screwdriver seated properly before you start turning that, or same thing, you will destroy the top of that brass jet. This is your pilot jet here. The orifice on this is extremely tiny, but you should be able to see through it. You hold this up to light, you can see all the way through it. Take carbon choke cleaner, clean it out if you need. I've got a couple different tools that I use to clean these jets out. You can buy those online on our store, check that out, but you can go through and clean these jets up with those tools. And then take compressed air then, or carbon choke cleaner, and blow all these ports out. Make sure all these are in good condition. Make sure there's no debris in there, and then we can start going back together with it. Before we go back together, I'm going to pull the top side of this carburetor apart so you can see what's underneath there. I'm going to scoot these jets and such over. You've got 2 screws in the top there. You can see 2 Phillips screws again. If these are challenging to pull out with your Phillips screwdriver, these are in a good enough position to where you can take and actually use a vice grips on there. I would suggest at that point buying new screws. You can get those from a lot of different hardware stores or auto stores. But if you use vice grips on here, you want to make sure you replace those. Pull this cap off there. You've got a spring underneath there. We've got a plastic keeper down there. And that spring then will sit right down in there when we go back together. Now our diaphragm here. I take my finger, push that up right through there. All right, we've got the slide and the diaphragm and all this assembly out. We've got our needle right here. We're going to take now and just push this needle out. We're going to inspect this needle, make sure it's on the right setting there. Take my small pair of pliers, pull that out, making sure that this doesn't sit in any kind of gas or any kind of carb cleaner. Make sure you don't get carb cleaner on this. What happens if you do that is this will expand and it'll be really hard to get back together. I'll show you a couple tricks there, but just try to keep that out of the fuel and out of the carb cleaner. Now we've got our clip here. This is an adjustable needle. Also has a size on it, so check that out if you put performance parts on your four-wheeler. A lot of times they'll suggest a needle size or at least a clip position. And a lot of times from the factory, these are at the on the middle setting there. This looks like one clip down from the top. And just make sure that you know exactly where that should go. Plastic spacer here sits right underneath the needle there. It is a special spacer, so you want to make sure that you've got the one. I like to get the one from Polaris. Check my video on aftermarket carburetors on my channel. That's a very, very popular video and some important stuff on there, so make sure you check that out. But that was a side note. This needle going back together there, make sure that plastic keeper is in the right spot there, that plastic washer. Drop that down in there. When I'm sliding my needle down in there, you want to make sure that it falls right down into that center area here, which is going to go right down into this port here. And I like to make sure that my diaphragm is folded over like this. And then what I do is keep my finger underneath there. Make sure this is seated properly. Because if you take and push this down, a lot of times what happens is it'll suck that diaphragm out of that groove there. So if you take and push that down like that, so it's going to look like that, kind of a little hat on top of there. Make sure that's completely seated. Take our spring then, set that down in there. Keeping your finger underneath of there, holding that slide about halfway up so our diaphragm doesn't jump out of place there. Take and set that on top. Make sure that that feels like it's completely seated. Make sure you can take then with your finger on top there, just make sure that there's no space around that cap. We put these screws in here like that. Still, again, make sure that your finger's underneath of there. And then snug these up. As soon as you get these snugged up, you can take your finger out from there, and that should go up and down freely without any issues there. If it doesn't, take that apart again and inspect it. Maybe you've got a rip in that diaphragm. That's fairly common and too easy to do. See too many carburetors with that damaged. Going back together then, take our needle. Again, I like to take a small pair of pliers here just so we can sit that in there properly. Set that on the hook there. We'll take our valve there, push that in, and then we'll take and set that down all the way. Well, I think I told you that this plastic port there went into there. It actually goes into that area there. Now our bowl is going to hold this float down, this entire assembly down. Okay, we'll grab our main jet there, screw that in. Our cap needs to sit on there properly. Make sure that all these parts are clean when you're going back together. We've already snugged up our main or our pilot jet. You want to make sure that that's snug. Take our bowl here and make sure that your washer is in, or your O-ring is in place there. And again, if you get fuel or carb cleaner on this O-ring here, it will swell up, won't sit down in there properly. What we do is just set it in the windowsill where we've got some sun, and it'll dry that out, kind of warm that up, suck that fuel out of there. It'll evaporate, and then we can go back together. Sometimes what I'll do too, if I have an issue with this O-ring here falling off when I take my bowl and set it upside down, I'll take a tiny bit of grease and just kind of put it in that groove there just to hold that on. But it's thick enough now to where it's just going to stay into place. Take our 2 Phillips screws then, set those on there, and tighten those up. Again, making sure that everything's seated properly. Otherwise, you're going to have fuel leaking from that O-ring there. We've got our air fuel screw underneath of this cap here. You can just take and pull that off. The other thing, we've got our idle adjust here. And this is where your throttle cable comes in. I've explained that in another video. But that throttle cable comes in. Check that out. Check out my other video. You've got your idle adjust here that'll actually open up that butterfly and slightly. So make sure your four-wheeler is good and warmed up before you start to adjust that idle. And just do small increments when you do go to adjust it. So make sure this cap is on, and your carburetor should be completely cleaned at this point. If you've got questions or comments, make sure and leave those in the comments below. If you've liked this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Please share this video if it's been helpful to you. Thanks for watching.